Okay, let's unpack this. We got a request really asking us to look into the whole move to the suburbs today. The search for that white picket fence, maybe more space, especially now.
Right.
And you might expect, a simple list like pros and cons for moving in 2025. But the sources you sent over, they point to something much deeper.
Yeah, that's right. They really give us let's call it the DNA of the American suburb. Its history, how it was designed, the economic forces behind it. It's not just about taste.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. Forget the simple checklist for a minute.
Exactly. We're going to trace how these residential areas got designed. It starts way back, this idea of a retreat. But then you get into things like exclusionary zoning, these complex financial setups.
And it all points to how the detached single-family home became this core investment vehicle in the U.S., maybe the most protected one.
Arguably, yes. It's a fascinating story, and understanding it helps you see the trade-offs that are literally built into the structure of American communities. It's not just about a bigger yard.
Okay, so we're drawing on some heavy hitters here. We got classic urban thinkers like Lewis Mumford, Jane Jacobs, historical analyses diving deep into how federal policy actually, enforced segregation structurally.
Crucial point, that one.
Plus modern economic takes on what's happening in cities now, this new urban crisis. And maybe most revealingly, we're looking at the playbook. The explicit strategies that savvy real estate investors use to actually capitalize on these very structures.
Right. The high leverage stuff, how people actively use this system.
So the goal is really for you, the listener, to understand the trade-offs, the ones baked into the foundation, not just the surface stuff.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. This massive shift of people outwards.
Yeah.
Where did the idea come from? It wasn't just about needing more bedrooms, was it?
Not initially, no. The origins were really rooted in this concept of escape.
Yeah.
And frankly, exclusivity. Lewis Mumford had this amazing quote describing the early suburban fantasy.
What was it?
The desire to withdraw like a monk and live like a prince. Wow. Okay. Withdraw like a monk, live like a prince. That says a lot.
It really captures the duality, doesn't it? The idea was to create an asylum, a retreat, a place specifically designed to overcome what people saw as the defects of civilization, especially the blight, the noise, the overcrowding of the 19th century industrial city.
So escape the bad stuff.
Exactly. But, and this is the key part, the suburbanites still wanted to command all the social and economic benefits of the city. They just didn't want to deal with the physical reality of it day to day.
The best of both worlds, but kept completely separate.
Spatially separate, functionally pure. That was the ideal.
And this functional purity, it was a direct reaction against the city itself, right? I'm thinking of Jane Jacobs here.
Absolutely. Jacobs, she kind of flipped the script. She argued that all those things people complained about in cities, the deterioration, the crime, the congestion, they were inherent flaws of cities.
Hey, were they then?
She saw them as surface symptoms. Symptoms of a deeper economic and functional failure happening within those specific urban districts. The suburb, in contrast, offered this clean slate, a way to design away that potential for failure from the start.
Interesting. So the design itself was meant to prevent the problems they saw in the city.
That was the theory. And what's really fascinating, if you look back at early descriptions of American growth, is how fuzzy the edges were physically.
What do you mean?
Well, unlike European cities, which often had clear walls or green belts marking the boundary, American cities just sort of sprawled. There's this quote from an arts journal called The Crayon back in 1855.
1855.
Yeah, complaining that, quote, city grows into country. We never know when we leave one or enter the other. It was this kind of amorphous blob.
Okay, but that sounds like a paradox. If the physical boundaries were blurry, how did they achieve that functional purity, that separation they wanted?
Ah, that's the crucial paradox. And it gets right to the heart of what makes American urbanism so exceptional. This is a big theme in the source zoned in the USA.
It's exceptional how?
Exceptionally low density, for one. And this overwhelming dominance of one specific housing type, the detached single-family home, always with a pretty large private yard.
Which feels very American culturally.
It does, but it's more than culture. That specific configuration detached house, big yard, became legally shielded, protected from basically everything else. Commercial activity, industry, even slightly denser housing like duplexes or apartments.
So a physical wall wasn't there, but they built a legal wall instead.
Exactly. An invisible but incredibly powerful legal wall through zoning. The physical merging didn't matter as much because the functional boundaries were made ironclad.
And you can actually see this desire for separation, for private space, reflected in the architecture pretty early on, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. It signals that shift away from dense vertical city living. We start seeing architectural styles designed explicitly for space and, well, seclusion.
Like what?
Well, the sources mention a rare surviving example in New York City, actually. A shingle-style house built way out on City Island purely as a summer retreat.
Shingle style. What's characteristic about that?
Think rustic surfaces, sort of flowing lines, broad porches that kind of embrace the landscape. It was a deliberate move away from the more formal, upright styles you'd find in the city. It was
Okay.
architecture designed to look good on a big, private piece of land.
It makes sense. It visually separates itself.
And this architectural shift wasn't just about looks, it was also driven by huge technological changes happening inside the home.
Right, things we take for granted now.
Totally. I mean, think about it. The source, American House Styles, makes this point. Just like the elevator shaped the skyscraper, things like the washing machine, the refrigerator, and especially the automobile fundamentally changed the design brief for the house.
How so?
Well, these new suburban homes were being designed for a lifestyle based on private consumption, self-sufficiency within the family unit, and minimal interaction with the public street. You needed space for the car, maybe two cars. You needed a dedicated laundry area.
So the technology demanded more space, pushing that low-density footprint.
Exactly. The two-car garage, the separate utility room, these weren't luxuries. They became requirements baked into the standard suburban house plan, enforcing that sprawl.
Now, the long commute,
Hmm.
we tend to think of that as maybe a 1950s post-war thing. But the sources say this pattern started way earlier, right?
No.
Among the wealthy.
Much earlier. It began with the affluent, the trendsetters, who had both the desire for that escape and the financial means to actually commute back into the city for work.
How do we know that?
We can track it using data on certain professions, like attorneys. They're economically tied to the downtown business district, but they often had disposable income.
Oh.
So in smaller cities, think Memphis, Binghamton, Patterson, the sources show that attorneys lived, on average, pretty close to their offices, like within 2 miles, right up until about 1925.
Okay, so still quite compact. But what about the big cities like New York?
Their New York City counterparts. They blew past that 2-mile average way back in 1860.
1860, that's decades before the car became common.
Decades. In the huge Hudson River metropolis, suburban flight was already happening. First, it was driven by ferry lines connecting to places like Brooklyn or New Jersey. Then, in the 1870s, you get the elevated rail lines snaking uptown and into the Bronx.
So the desire came first, then the tech to enable it for the wealthy.
Precisely. It shows the suburban ideal, this desire for separation, preceded mass adoption. It required these pioneering transportation technologies to make it economically viable, even for the upper crust. The seeds of that long commute, the one many people experience today, were planted by elite choices over 160 years ago.
That really reframes the whole narrative. It wasn't just a mass movement out of nowhere after the war.
Not at all. The template was set much, much earlier. Okay, so if that retreat ideal was the dream, the engine that actually built and protected it was zoning. This is the legal bedrock.
Zoning, it sounds kind of dry, but you're saying it's fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. One source, Zoned in the USA, calls it the mother lode of city rules.
Yeah.
And it's used almost everywhere in America. It's the mechanism that translated that desire for functional purity into, well, legal certainty.
So what does zoning actually do? What are the tools in that toolbox that protect the single-family home so effectively?
Okay, it basically operates on 3 main levels, and together they create that shield around the single-family zone. First, it carves up the land into different zones. Residential over here, commercial over there, industrial somewhere else. This dictates what activities are allowed where.
Got it. Separation of uses.
Second, it sets physical rules within those zones. Things like how far back a house has to be from the street, setbacks, how tall it can be, how much of the lot it can cover, and crucially, minimum lot sizes.
Minimum lot sizes. That directly impacts density.
Directly. And third, and this is often the most controversial part, zoning controls the type of housing allowed. Often, it explicitly limits construction to only detached single-family houses.
So it's not just separating houses from factories. It's separating single-family houses from, say, apartment buildings or townhouses.
Exactly. This triple whammy of rules use, physical form, and housing type severely restricts the variety of housing that can be built, locks in low density, and as a result, limits the types of people who can afford to live in those areas.
And this wasn't just local preference. This legal structure, this purity, Got the stamp of approval from the highest court in the land, right back in the 1920s.
That's right, 1926. A landmark Supreme Court case, Village of Euclid v. Ambler Realty Co. This is where the court explicitly validated the idea that density itself could be seen as harmful to the detached home environment.
How did they frame that?
Well, the court upheld the right of municipalities to use zoning to prohibit apartment buildings in neighborhoods designated for single-family homes, and the language used by Justice George Sutherland, writing for the majority. It was incredibly stark.
Stark cow.
He referred to the apartment house as a mere parasite.
A parasite. Wow. That's an intense language for a legal opinion.
It really is. And it peels back the curtain on the underlying economic thinking at the time. The idea was that an apartment building was essentially leeching off the nice, quiet, safe, open environment created by the surrounding expensive, low-density single-family homes.
So the apartment building benefits from the character of the single-family zone.
Without contributing to it, in their view, and in fact degrading it by bringing in more people, more traffic, less open space. The court basically gave its legal blessing to the idea that density, and by extension greater affordability, was inherently detrimental to the value of the suburban single-family home.
Okay, this is where it gets really critical, isn't it? Because the federal government then steps in and takes this legal framework, this idea of protecting single-family zones, and uses it to enforce segregation, defining suburban value explicitly through racial and economic exclusion.
This is a crucial and frankly disturbing part of the story. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, created during the New Deal, played an absolutely instrumental role here.
How so? What did the FHA do?
The sources, like Crabgrass Frontier and The Color of Law, document this in chilling detail. The FHA, whose job was to ensure mortgages and stabilize the housing market, was, quote, extraordinarily concerned with inharmonious racial or nationality groups.
Inharmonious groups, meaning non-white people.
Primarily black families, but also other ethnic minorities and sometimes even lower-income white families. The FHA's entire model for assessing mortgage risk was built on the deeply racist assumption that neighborhoods needed to be racially homogenous, specifically all white, to be considered stable and financially sound.
So racial segregation wasn't just a social outcome. It was an explicit requirement for getting an FHA-backed loan.
It was a prerequisite for the lowest risk ratings, which translated into the best loan terms. They weren't just passively reflecting existing prejudice, they were actively mandating segregation as a condition of federal financial backing.
How do they enforce that?
Their official underwriting manuals openly recommended, quote, subdivision regulations and suitable restrictive covenants, meaning agreements written into property deeds explicitly prohibiting sale to or occupancy by non-white people. They saw these covenants as superior to the mortgage guarantee itself for maintaining long-term value.
So they actively encouraged these racist deed restrictions.
Encouraged and often required them. They needed rigid white-black separation. And beyond that, they actively discouraged housing types often associated with working-class or immigrant communities, like traditional row houses, often denying loan guarantees for entire developments if they didn't meet this low-density, racially exclusive standard they believed was necessary to protect property values.
And it wasn't just the FHA doing this.
No. After World War II, the Veterans Administration, the VA, which guaranteed millions of mortgages for returning GIs under the GI Bill, frequently adopted similar practices. They often demanded that properties getting VA loans have these racial covenants written into their deeds.
So this was systematic. Government policy at the highest levels, actively shaping the post-war housing boom to be segregated.
It was a massive structural intervention. It fundamentally shaped where and how America grew in the mid-20th century. Now, it's important to note, the Supreme Court did eventually rule against the enforcement of these racial covenants by courts in 1948 in the case Shelley v. Kramer.
Okay, so they couldn't be legally enforced after 48.
Correct. But, as the sources powerfully argue, by that point, the damage was done. Decades of federal policy had already etched segregation into the physical and financial landscape of the country. The government had essentially drawn the blueprints for the modern American suburb, and those blueprints were explicitly designed for racial and economic exclusion. The pattern was set.
So what happened to the families, particularly black families, who were systematically locked out of this FHA-backed suburban expansion? What were the immediate economic consequences of redlining?
The consequences were devastating and created a vicious cycle. Because African Americans couldn't get those conventional low-interest FHA mortgages to buy homes in white or newly developing suburban areas, those areas literally colored red on FHA maps, hence redlining, they were often forced into a predatory alternative in segregated urban neighborhoods. The contract sales system.
Contract sales. How do those work? They sound ominous.
They were. A contract sale looked a bit like a mortgage on the surface. You made regular payments towards buying the house. But the crucial, brutal difference was that the buyer built no equity until the very last payment was made. The seller, often a speculator who bought the property cheap, held onto the actual deed.
No equity. So if you missed a payment,
If you missed even one payment, maybe because of a job loss or illness, the seller could immediately evict you, keep all the payments you had already made over the years, and then sell the same house on contract to another desperate family.
that's incredibly predatory.
It was ruthlessly exploitative. Sources describe the situation in places like Chicago in the 1960s vividly. Families were paying inflated prices on these contracts, often working multiple jobs just to make the payments, living under constant fear of losing everything. Saving money was impossible under those conditions.
And how does this connect back to the physical condition of those neighborhoods, the deterioration that people often blamed on the residents?
It connects directly. Because the contract buyers didn't actually own the home, they didn't hold the deed. They couldn't get traditional home improvement loans or access home equity for basic maintenance and repairs.
Ah, right. No collateral.
Exactly. Plus, they were financially stretched to the absolute limit just making the contract payments. So the resulting overcrowding as families doubled up to make payments, the neglect of basic upkeep, the inability to invest in the property, these conditions were the direct, predictable outcome of being locked out of the mainstream government-subsidized mortgage system.
So the decay wasn't inherent to the people. It was a result of the system they were forced into.
Precisely. The very conditions that white homeowners or policymakers might point to as proof that integration lowered property values were, in fact, manufactured by the discriminatory financial system itself. The government's policies of racial isolation created the conditions for blight.
And this isn't just ancient history, is it? The sources suggest this legacy persists.
Definitely. The Color of Law points out that even today, federal housing assistance programs often disproportionately channel low-income African Americans into these same historically segregated, often under-resourced neighborhoods. The patterns of racial and economic isolation established decades ago remain incredibly sticky and hard to undo. The economic damage is structural and continues to impact wealth generation across generations.
Okay, so we've painted this picture of the suburb as this, well, engineered sanctuary. Designed for escape, legally protected, financially structured for exclusivity. But the story doesn't end there. Fast forward to the 21st century, and we're seeing a really interesting counter-trend, aren't we?
A very powerful one. It's often called the demographic inversion.
Demographic inversion,
Yeah.
meaning
Meaning the flow is reversing in some significant ways. The very cities that those original suburbanites were fleeing, they're now attracting people with resources, often younger professionals, affluent individuals, back towards the urban core.
and it's not just about population numbers shifting back.
No, the sources emphasize it's driven by choice. It's about a preference for a different lifestyle. People are actively choosing the city center for things the suburbs often lack the opportunity for spontaneous social interaction, bumping into people on the street, hanging out in neighborhood cafes, easy access to cultural venues, a walkable life.
Things that the car-centric suburban design actively discourages in many cases.
Exactly. It's a desire for that casual social energy that suburbs, by their very design, often don't provide.
Do we have examples of this inversion playing out?
Oh, absolutely. The source, The Great Inversion, points to places like downtown Charlotte. It went through a huge transformation. Once perhaps struggling, it's become this really affluent, vibrant hub. You see gleaming postmodern office towers next to high-end condos, lively sidewalk cafes, lots of people walking around.
So the exact opposite of the quiet, private, drive-everywhere suburban model.
Precisely. It's the spatial and functional inverse of what the original suburbs were trying to achieve. It's density, mixed use, walkability, all attracting investment and affluent residents back in.
But this urban revival often seems to be in tension with the infrastructure that grew up around the suburban era, especially the car. Jane Jacobs was pretty scathing about how cities tried to accommodate cars, wasn't she?
Scathing is putting it mildly. She saw the whole effort to make cities more car-friendly as, in her words, one of those jokes that history sometimes plays on
A
progress.
joke? Why?
Because her core argument was that when you try to duplicate suburban conditions inside the city, think massive parking lots, tearing down buildings for wider roads, prioritizing traffic flow above all else, you actively destroy the very things that make cities work.
Which are?
The density, the mix of uses, the walkable streets, the close-grained fabric that fosters innovation and social interaction. You kill the city in an attempt to make it convenient for suburban-style transportation.
And there are concrete examples of this destruction in the sources, right? Where prioritizing the car literally scarred the city.
Yeah, a really poignant example comes from Memphis concerning Union Avenue. It used to be this grand traditional boulevard with buildings right up to the sidewalk, a continuous urban streetscape.
Okay.
But then, in the name of modernization and making things easier for drivers, parts of it were demolished to put in a fast food restaurant with a big parking lot and drive-through lanes.
The typical suburban model plopped onto an urban street.
Exactly. And the ultimate bitter irony, that specific fast food place went bankrupt just 3 years later.
Whoa.
But the damage was done, the building was gone, the continuity of the street wall was broken, leaving this gaping hole, this scar. It's a perfect illustration of how quickly and easily you can degrade a functioning urban environment by prioritizing the car and the suburban land use pattern over the city's own logic.
This brings us to a really complex issue, though. This urban revival, this demographic inversion that's happening, cities are attracting talent and investment. But it seems to be creating its own set of problems, a kind of paradox.
That's right. The success itself is generating deeper inequality. This is what Richard Florida and others have termed the new urban crisis.
The new urban crisis, what defines that?
It's the observation that while these superstar cities, think New York, London, San Francisco, Boston, LA, are incredibly economically productive and desirable places to live for some.
The highly educated, high-income earners.
Exactly. The creative class, the tech workers, the finance professionals, they are reaping the vast majority of the economic rewards generated in these hubs. It's becoming a winner-take-all urbanism.
And the flip side, what happens to everyone else who needs to live and work in the city?
That's the crisis. The
Yeah.
working class, the service workers, the teachers, nurses, bus drivers, restaurant staff, childcare workers, the people who actually make the city function day to day, they simply cannot keep up.
Priced out.
Completely priced out, especially by housing costs. The intense demand from high earners drives rents and home prices into the stratosphere, pushing essential workers further and further away from the urban core where the jobs are.
Which ironically makes the city harder to live in for the affluent people, too, if services decline.
It's a feedback loop. You
Hmm.
get longer commutes for essential workers, labor shortages in key service sectors, and ultimately deepening economic segregation within the metro area. The very success that makes the city attractive to the winners ends up pushing out the workers who support that success.
It sounds like a really difficult structural problem. Does this inequality look the same everywhere, though? Or does it vary based on the city's history?
It varies. The pattern is quite complex according to the data presented in the new urban crisis. While those superstar cities definitely show the most extreme wealth concentration at the top, the highest levels of overall income segregation, meaning the actual physical separation of rich and poor neighborhoods, are often found not in the booming coastal hubs, but in struggling Rust Belt metro areas, places like Cleveland, Detroit, Milwaukee.
Huh. Why the difference?
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive.
It suggests different drivers. In the superstar cities, segregation seems driven largely by the incredibly high cost of housing near the high-paying job centers, effectively sorting people by income based on who can afford to live close in.
Okay.
In the Rust Belt cities, the segregation pattern might be more rooted in historical factors. Decades of deindustrialization, job losses in the middle wage sector, white flight that occurred earlier, leaving behind large areas of concentrated poverty while wealth remains isolated in historically affluent, often suburban enclaves.
So different causes, but the outcome is separation.
Yes. And the research shows that regardless of the specific local history, income segregation is strongly correlated with factors like the overall size of the metro area, its density, the concentration of high-tech industry, and the size of the creative class. It appears to be a near-universal feature of the contemporary American urban landscape, even if the driving forces differ.
Okay, we've journeyed through the history, the legal structures, the urban pushback. Now, let's really bring this home for the listener facing these choices today. We need to connect all this directly to the financial decision-making. Because that single-family house, particularly in the suburbs, isn't just shelter, is it?
Not at all. It's fundamentally positioned, partly because of that history we just discussed, as a financial instrument, a wealth-generating asset.
So how does it compare to other ways people build wealth, like investing in the stock market through a 401k or an IRA?
Well, the sources are pretty clear on this. Real estate investing, especially actively buying and managing properties, is going to require more work. It's not passive like contributing to a retirement account. You have to find deals, arrange financing, manage tenants or renovations.
It's a hands-on business.
It absolutely is. But for that extra effort, the potential payoff can be much faster wealth generation. And the primary reason for that comes down to one word: leverage.
Leverage. Let's break that down in the context of buying a house.
Okay, leverage is basically using borrowed money to control a large asset. So let's say you buy a house worth $500,000. You probably don't pay all cash. You might put down 20%, which is $100,000.
Right. The bank lends you the other $400,000.
Exactly. Now, you control a $500,000 asset with only $100,000 your own capital invested. If that house appreciates in value by, say, 10% in a year, that's $50,000, your gain isn't calculated on your $100,000 down payment. It's calculated on the full value of the house.
Ah, so you made $50,000 on a $100,000 investment. That's a 50% return on your cash before costs.
Precisely. Your percentage return is magnified enormously compared to if you just invested that $100,000 without leverage. That amplification effect is the engine that drives rapid wealth growth in real estate.
And the sources mention specific ways investors use leverage, like tapping into the equity they already have in their own home, using a 8-ELO-C.
Yes, a home equity line of credit, or 8-ELO-C. This is basically a way to borrow against the ownership stake you've built up in your primary residence. It can be a powerful tool because it gives you access to cash, potentially for a down payment on an investment property.
Sounds useful, but risky.
Very risky if not managed carefully. It's an aggressive strategy. Why? Because first, you're adding another monthly payment, the interest on the HELOC, which eats into your cash flow. Second, you're increasing your overall debt load significantly.
So if things go wrong, the rental market softens, you have unexpected vacancies or repairs.
You could find yourself over-leveraged very quickly, potentially forced to sell properties at a bad time. A ELOC provides capital, but it reduces your financial cushion and flexibility. It demands discipline and careful planning.
Now, for people just starting out in real estate investing, maybe with less capital or experience, the advice seems to lean heavily towards starting with single-family homes, right? Not jumping straight into apartment buildings.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The sources like the Millionaire Real Estate Investor strongly recommend single-family houses for smaller or newer investors.
Why is that?
Several reasons. They generally involve less complexity, fewer tenants, simpler maintenance, more straightforward financing. The risk is perceived as lower, both by the investor and by the banks.
Banks are more comfortable lending on single-family homes.
Generally, yes. It's a familiar asset class. Banks are often willing to finance single-family rental properties incrementally, allowing an investor to build a track record, gain experience, and establish relationships. Then, maybe down the road, they can scale up to small multifamily properties like duplexes or fourplexes, and eventually, perhaps larger apartment buildings, which require much more capital, sophisticated management, and different financing structures.
It was a stepping stone approach.
It's often framed that way. Start small, learn the ropes, build equity and credibility, then scale.
But succeeding even with single-family homes requires more than just buying a house, doesn't it? It requires a specific mindset.
Absolutely. It requires shifting from thinking like a homeowner to thinking like an investor. The Millionaire Real Estate Investor talks about operating with big goals, big models, and big habits.
What does that mean in practice?
A core part of it is being an investor, not a consumer. This means you rigorously analyze every spending decision by comparing the price you're paying to the actual value you're receiving, whether it's buying a property, hiring a contractor, or even choosing materials.
So constantly looking for value, not just accepting the sticker price.
Relentlessly. They are described as being tough negotiators, always looking for a deal, willing to walk away if the numbers don't make sense or the value proposition isn't crystal clear.
And this focus on value, on getting a good deal up front, connects directly to a really important investment concept, the margin of safety.
Yes, the margin of safety is critical. It's a principle borrowed from value investing in the stock market, famously championed by Benjamin Graham. It's what separates disciplined investing from pure speculation.
How does it apply to buying a house?
In residential real estate, savvy investors aren't just hoping the market goes up. They aim for two things simultaneously. First, Identify properties in areas they believe will appreciate faster than average. Second, and crucially, they buy those properties at a discount to their current market value.
Buying below market.
Exactly. That discount is the margin of safety. It's built-in profit. It's equity you capture the moment you close the deal before any market appreciation happens. It provides a buffer against mistakes, unexpected costs, or market downturns.
And how much of a discount are we talking?
Some of the sources suggest that really experienced investors won't even touch a property unless they are confident they can acquire it or improve it in such a way that creates an immediate equity position of maybe 20 or even 30%. That's their built-in protection.
Okay, now let's tie this back. How does that history of suburban design, specifically exclusionary zoning that we talked about earlier, help guarantee that margin of safety for investors focusing on single-family homes?
This is the absolute crucial link between the history and the finance. That restrictive single-family zoning, especially in desirable, high-demand suburban areas, acts like a legal fortress.
How so?
By prohibiting the construction of denser, often more affordable housing types, apartments, townhouses, multiplexes, it artificially constricts the supply of housing units in that legally defined area.
Okay, supply is limited by law.
Right. And if you're in an area where demand remains consistently high, big schools, safe streets, proximity to jobs, this legally enforced scarcity puts constant upward pressure on the prices of the only type of housing allowed, the existing single-family homes.
So the zoning basically protects the asset value from competition.
It acts as a powerful shield against the kind of market disruption that increased density or mixed-use development might bring. That legal protection against change, against density, is the fundamental guarantee underpinning the long-term appreciation potential and, therefore, the safety margin for investors in those zones. They're investing in an asset class whose supply is deliberately legally constrained.
That's a really powerful connection. The legal structure directly creates the investment opportunity and safety.
It's fundamental to understanding why the single-family home in certain zoned areas has been such a reliable wealth-building tool.
Beyond appreciation and leverage, there's another huge factor: taxes. Real estate seems to get some pretty favorable tax treatment compared to other investments.
Oh, the tax advantages are significant. It's often seen as a form of government subsidy for property owners. While putting money in a tax-advantaged retirement account like an IRA or 401k is great because it defers taxes.
Right, you pay taxes later.
Investment real estate offers multiple benefits, often simultaneously. You get potential cash flow from rent, you get potential appreciation in the property's value over time, and you get substantial tax write-offs, most notably through depreciation.
Depreciation, can you explain that? It seems counterintuitive for an asset that's hopefully going up in value.
It does seem strange, but it's a huge benefit. The IRS allows you to deduct a portion of the value of the building, not the land, each year over a set period, currently 27.5 years for residential rental property. The rationale is that the building itself is theoretically wearing out over time, even if the overall property value is rising due to land value and market demand.
And this is a deduction even if you didn't actually spend that money on repairs that year.
Correct. It's a non-cash expense. You deduct it on your tax return, reducing your taxable rental income, even though no money actually left your pocket for depreciation itself. This can often make a property that's generating positive cash flow appear, on paper for tax purposes, to be breaking even or even losing money.
Which means you pay less tax on the actual cash you receive.
Dramatically less in many cases. It's a powerful tax shelter that significantly boosts your real after-tax return compared to investments taxed as ordinary income. Plus, there are other benefits, like deducting mortgage interest and property taxes. And when you eventually sell, profits are typically taxed at lower long-term capital gains rates, and even those taxes can often be deferred indefinitely if you reinvest the proceeds into another similar property using a Section 131 exchange.
Okay, so leverage, appreciation often supported by zoning, and significant tax advantages. It paints a picture of a very optimized investment class.
It's a powerful combination.
Which leads us to this modern strategy that seems to encapsulate all of this. The BRRR method: buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat.
Yes, BRRR has become a very popular model, especially for investors looking to scale relatively quickly. It really ties together many of the concepts we've discussed.
Walk us through it. How does it work?
Okay, so the steps are in the name. Buy. You start by finding a distressed property, a fixer-upper, something nasty, as one source puts it. The key is buying it significantly below its potential after-repair value. ARV, ideally in a good, stable, well-zoned location. Because it's distressed, you often can't get traditional bank financing initially.
So how do you buy it?
Creative financing is key here. Maybe you use cash if you have it, or bring in a partner, or use a short-term, high-interest loan from a hard money lender who lends based on the property's potential value, not its current condition.
Okay, step 1, buy cheap with creative financing. Step 2, rehab.
Right. And the rehab isn't just about making it livable, it's about maximizing forced appreciation. You strategically invest renovation money to increase the property's market value as much as possible, aiming to significantly exceed the actual cost of the repairs. This creates instant equity.
What's the risk here?
The biggest risk during the rehab phase is blowing the budget, or, crucially, the property not appraising for as much as you expected after the work is done. An appraisal gap can derail the whole strategy.
Assuming the rehab goes well and the value increases. Next is rent.
Yep. You place a qualified tenant in the property to start generating cash flow. This stabilizes the asset and demonstrates income potential to future lenders.
Then comes the crucial step, refinance.
This is the magic step. Now that the property is fixed up, stabilized with a tenant, and worth significantly more, you go to a conventional bank or lender and refinance the property based on its new, higher appraised value, the ARV.
And the goal of the refinance isn't just to get a normal mortgage.
The primary goal in BRRR is to pull out as much cash as possible, ideally all of the capital you originally invested in the purchase and the rehab, plus maybe even some extra profit, while still leaving enough equity in the deal to satisfy the lender's loan-to-value requirements.
So you get your initial investment back out.
Exactly. You convert that equity you created, both by buying right and through the forced appreciation of the rehab, back into liquid cash.
Which leads to the final R repeat.
You take that cash you just pulled out from the refinance and you immediately use it as the down payment or full purchase price for the next distressed property. And you start the whole cycle over again. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance.
It sounds like a powerful way to compound growth without having to save up slowly for each new down payment.
That's the core idea. It dramatically accelerates the velocity of your capital. As one source puts it, converting equity, whether from market appreciation or forced appreciation, into cash through refinancing is much, much faster than trying to save up enough cash flow month after month to buy the next property. BRRR is designed to bypass that slow save-it process and enable rapid portfolio growth, assuming you execute each step correctly and manage the risks involved. #outro. So when we step back and look at everything we've covered, the history, the zoning, the finance, the urban dynamics, it becomes clear that this choice, city versus suburb, isn't just about lifestyle preferences. It's really a choice between two quite distinct economic and social systems, both heavily engineered over time, largely by government policy.
Yeah, it's not just lawn size versus commute time.
Not at all. The suburb, as historically designed and legally protected, offers this promise of private space, yes, but also functions as this engine for relatively predictable wealth accumulation, especially through the ownership of that single-family home. Its value is buttressed by zoning, by tax policies.
Well, the city.
The city offers density, diversity, though, as I've seen, that's often coupled with deep inequality, social energy, economic dynamism, innovation, but perhaps with more volatility and less of that legally guaranteed stability for residential property values in some ways.
So for you, the listener, thinking about where to live or where to invest, your decision isn't happening in a vacuum. It's not just about your personal pros and cons list for 2025. You're essentially deciding which of these historical and financial engines you want to plug into.
And recognizing that the perceived safety and stability of that suburban single-family home isn't just an accident of the market. It's in large part a direct product of decades of deliberate policy designed specifically to protect it from competition and change.
Which leaves us with a final thought, a provocative question for you to consider. If you had to choose a residential investment property today, aiming purely for the most protected margin of safety for the long term, would you put your capital into that legally shielded, low-density, single-family zone, the one designed to resist change? Or would you bet on a dense, walkable city core that's experiencing that demographic inversion, where the potential upside might be huge, but where you're also inherently exposed to the volatility and the unpredictable social and economic consequences of that new urban crisis? Which path offers the greater, truly protected margin of safety looking ahead?